So as Pastor Rusty was lifting up there, I too am very excited for this Palm Sunday. It's just a very exciting service for me. I was talking to one of my colleagues, one of my buddies in ministry. We were both Army chaplains. I was talking to him this past week about some Army things, and I lifted up to him, "Hey, are you ready for Palm Sunday?" And he said, "Oh, that's this Sunday?" It's like, "Yeah, dude." I'm like, "What do you mean it's this Sunday?" "Yes, it's this Sunday." "Why aren't you more excited?" He's like, "Oh, I don't like that one." I was like, "What do you mean you don't like Palm Sunday?" He's like, "The readings are too long." I'm like, "Come on, dude. When do we ever get to, get sticks or twigs or palm branches and wave them in the sanctuary? We get to shout, we get to scream, we get to proclaim the good news of Jesus Christ together, and it's exciting." See, for me, growing up, I only ever knew what you would call traditional or classic worship, right? And so for me, growing up, for most of the year, it was a little bit stuffy, maybe to say the polite way. Put it this way: the reason in the Catholic Mass, the liturgy, that you stand up and sit down so much is so you don't fall asleep anytime, right? It can be a little boring. I didn't know you could have drums at worship for a very long time, and so for me, Palm Sunday was always so very exciting. And so it is my privilege to be able to close out our current sermon series called First Things First on this Palm Sunday. And so throughout this series, we've been looking at the priorities of Jesus and how that through this journey that we call Lent, these 40 days excluding Sundays, as we make our way to Holy Week, we're looking at the priorities of Jesus and how we can walk hand in hand with him. And so it's my privilege to close out this series. We've talked about different priorities such as love God and love people, that's right. And then also I really appreciated when Pastor Rusty preached on the understanding of we also have to be able to love ourselves, right? That's what God calls us to do as well. We also talked about the idea of it is our jobs, it is our priority to share that good news with other people. And so I'm just grateful to be able to close out the series on this Palm Sunday. And as I was reflecting on this reading these past couple of weeks, the thing that I've kind of narrowed in on, the thing that I've thought a lot about was just that crowd, that gathered people, whether they were inside the city gates or outside the city gates, and they were just so excited. They were waving their palm branches being a sign for victory, a sign for peace. And it didn't matter, where they came from, because everyone was coming from all over to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover, right? And so this big, huge group of people were so excited to see the Messiah, so excited to see Jesus. And it kind of reminded me of one of the coolest things I ever got to do in Army ROTC in college. No, I didn't get to go anywhere cool, and no, I didn't get to jump out of planes or anything, but the coolest thing I got to do was be a part of color guards. So those are the folks who come out before the national anthem to do the national anthem. And so I got to do them for our college, Xavier University. And each year, Xavier has their rivalry game, which is called the Crosstown Shootout. It's a huge game. It's really, really important in basketball because the University of Cincinnati and Xavier University are like 2 miles away from each other. So it's a big rivalry. And people go crazy. Okay, so if you don't know anything about Ohio, that's where Xavier is. Ohio is kind of like Hoth, the planet Hoth from Star Wars. Okay, it's cold all year round. There's probably snow on the ground most of the year. But yet these people, whether it be students, faculty, alumni, people from the community, they will camp out overnight to get tickets for this game. It's a huge deal. And so my senior year, it was played at Xavier University. So we got to do the color guard for that game. And the really cool thing was our arena was on a hill. And so students, faculty, everybody would line up this hill and to get into the arena. And they had, parking was just a bear, and they had everything blocked off. And so we get there to the arena, and we couldn't get by the regular way. We had to get out of our van and march down the pathway past all these people, all this crowd of people. And, they're having a good time, right? They're tailgating, they're enjoying it. They've been there probably the night before. And about a quarter of the way down, as I'm making my way, I see some folks that I knew my freshman year. I lived with them and that. And there's always that one friend who you're never quite sure what they're going to say when they open their mouth. But I saw him, and I knew he was about to say something. And he started to chant, USA, USA. And I kid you not, all the people down this very long crowd started chanting USA as the ROTC cadets as we made our way down to get into the arena. And it was really cool. It was really special. It made us feel like we were supported as we were a family. Because you got to remember, in that line, there was There was UC fans, there were Xavier fans, there were alumni, there were people young, there were people old, but they all came together. And when they started that chant, it was very, very cool. And I just wonder, man, how much more amazing that first Palm Sunday must have been, as those people from all over gathered to shout and sing Jesus' praises. And look, y'all, we know today, now Jesus' purpose of going to Jerusalem was to become king, but just not the way that those first folks who were waving those palm branches thought. You know, they were expecting a king like David, a conquering, a warring king. They thought he was going to ride into Jerusalem and go to war against the Roman occupation and liberate the people. Jesus is our king. He's the rightful king. He's the king of creation. He's the Son of the living God, the Messiah, the anointed one, chosen by God to establish his kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. But he is a very, very different king than what they thought on that first Palm Sunday. And if we're being honest, he's a much better king, better than we ever could have expected. He didn't come to liberate the people from the Roman occupation. Instead, he came to liberate us from sin. He gave us something that we could never gain or achieve on our own. Jesus is the king who willingly died for his people rather than sending his people to die for him. He is a king who used his power for the good of his people rather than abuse his power for the good of himself. And while Jesus was riding into Jerusalem, all those cheering for him, we know as we make our way through Holy Week, would end up abandoning him. His best friends denied even knowing him. And at the very least, they were probably in a mob booing him. But I got to imagine that Jesus and his disciples on that Palm Sunday, they probably felt encouraged as they heard those voices, as they heard those cries, that they rallied around their teacher, their rabbi, and their friend. And so today, as we close out this series, I want to talk about the priority of community, of being the church. The importance and significance of the church today, the understanding that there is power in partnership. And the reason I want to close out this series on the priority of the church is because I believe that we live in a vastly different world than we did maybe when you were growing up or maybe just 3 years ago. We live in a vastly different world. And just a couple examples of this. When I first got here, I heard some families in the youth ministry saying that they had like sports tournaments for their kids during Holy Week. And for me, I thought, wow, that's so bizarre. Like for me growing up, they never scheduled sports during Holy Week. And so I thought maybe that first year, maybe it was just a fluke. You know, Easter is on a different day each year, so maybe they just got it wrong. But then over these next couple of years, I see it, that there's activities, there's things that parents are now having to choose between letting their kids go play sports or to come to church, to worship. And that's a really hard place to be. That the church is not the same priority as it was when we were little. I would be willing to bet if you were to ask your parents, why do we have to go to church? You might get booped on the head, right? Like, what do you mean, why do we have to go to the church? Of course we're going to church. Or for me personally, I know my grandfather, who was a Sunday school teacher for 30 years, very long time. If I was to ask him what's the point of going to church, or why should we go to church, he probably would just be flabbergasted. He probably wouldn't be able to really understand, like, what do you mean, why do we go to church? And yet, today, more than ever, as the church, as the people of God, we have to be willing and ready to answer that question. Because people are asking it. It is not the same as it once was. The other things that I often hear when I tell people I work in the church or that I'm a pastor, they might tell me that they don't go to church anymore because the church was boring. Or they might say that the church felt disconnected from the community in which their physical building was in. And these critiques are all valid. These are all valid critiques of the church. And it's sad that sometimes we do get it wrong. Sometimes we focus inwardly instead of focusing outwardly like Jesus tells us. But the one that I heard that really stuck with me that I'd like to lift up for you this morning from a friend of mine, they said the church just played it too safe. And they didn't mean safety as in like sanctuary, like yes, we know the church is a safe space, is a safe place for all to gather. They meant they played it safe as in they cared more about the bottom line of their finances, about having their four walls of their church, or if they had pews, or what the artwork looked like. They cared more about the inside of the church, and they didn't want to cause any waves in the community. They didn't want to go out and do great ministry. They wanted to focus on their little area, and they played it safe. And I find that so funny, because when I read about Jesus in Scripture, there was nothing safe about the Son of God. This guy touched lepers, he befriended prostitutes, and he enlisted tax collectors who were hated by society to be part of his discipleship team. Then here's the other thing that I hear about the church today. I hear that we are narrow-minded, that we are judgmental, that we are a hypocritical people. And now I can see how, especially young people, I've been to UNT's campus to serve at campus ministry. I've seen these sidewalk preachers who are yelling at these kids and telling them they're damned or they're going to hell. And I can certainly see how people might get in their minds that the church can be that type of place. I think it's also important, though, to lift up that the church is not for perfect people. I don't see anyone shining or polishing their halos right now, right? Maybe you are at home, but not here. The church is for broken people. And we come just as we are. That's just how Jesus invited us, just as we are. We have our isms, our schisms, we have our brokenness and our dysfunctions. The interesting thing when we look at the gospel, when we look at the story of Jesus' ministry, Jesus loved those who hated him. And Jesus blessed those who persecuted him. And he welcomed everybody, even those that religion rejected. I think when we talk about the significance of the church, and it is significant, that we need to acknowledge that the church has hurt people in the past, that the body, the people of God, haven't always gotten it right. And I'll be the first to acknowledge that. I've made mistakes. I'm not perfect. But what I really hope that we can be is a church that Christ intended us to be, to help bring about healing and wholeness in a broken and sinful world. Now, on the other side, so there are these folks who maybe don't see the church as a priority, but yet, in recent studies, people who do deem church a priority, the statistics tell us that the average church attendance is 1 Sunday a month. So that would mean 12 Sundays a year. So there you go, Easter and Christmas. That's 2 of the 10 right there. But here's the thing. I've entitled today's message, Between Two Sundays. Church does not just happen on Sunday. So much happens in between our Sundays, right? We take, for example, this Holy Week, okay? Palm Sunday marks the beginning of Holy Week, this triumphal entry for Jesus, okay? But then so much happens between now and Easter Sunday. We see early on in the week, we get the story of Jesus flipping over tables in the temple, right, and causing a ruckus. We see him celebrating the Passover meal with his friends. We see him giving a commandment to his friends to love them as he has loved them. We get the sacrament of Holy Communion at the Last Supper. We see Jesus going to the garden with his friends to pray before he's arrested. So much happens between these 2 Sundays for this week, and it's important to celebrate that, to remember that, and to lift that up. But the same for us today. So much happens between our 2 Sundays when we gather for worship. So much happens. We go to work. We get the results from our doctor. We drop the kids off at school. The car might break down. The bills are due. There is so much that happens between 2 Sundays. And being the church is not just about showing up on Sunday morning, but about being the church in the world each and every day of the week. A lot happens between Sundays. But there's power in partnership. And it's Jesus himself who gives us the church. And we see this in Matthew chapter 16, verses 17 and 18. This comes after Jesus asks his disciples, who do people say that I am? And then he asks his disciples, well, who do you say that I am? And Peter, quick to the draw, says, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And here we pick up in the reading. Jesus replied, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, which is Greek for rock, and on this rock I will build my what? I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. A quick side note as it relates to this reading. I love Peter. He's a great disciple. He's brash. He's quick to the draw. He doesn't always get it right. He argues with his friends. Pretty relatable guy, right? And yet, what did Jesus just tell him? That's the type of people who are going to bring about the church, who are going to build the church. Ordinary people, just like you and me. Another thought that has been on my mind while reflecting on our Palm Sunday reading, I've been wondering who was in that crowd when Jesus made his way into the city. I mean, we think about it, they gathered from all over to come into Jerusalem for the Passover feast. I wonder, was Zacchaeus there? Do you all know Zacchaeus, the wee little man, right? The story of Zacchaeus can be found in Luke chapter 19, verses 1 through 10. Zacchaeus was a tax collector, and in society, the Jewish people did not like tax collectors. They saw them as betrayers. They saw them as part of the enemy because they were working for the Roman occupation. And also they were probably skimming off the top. So they were then stealing from their own people. So they were not too favored in society. Zacchaeus was a tax collector in Jericho. And when Jesus went through Jericho on his way to Jerusalem, he met this tax collector. He met him right where he was in his brokenness and his dysfunction. And we see Jesus say this to the crowd, starting in verse 9. Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost." After that, Zacchaeus' life was forever changed. This morning, I would like to lift up 3 important reasons why the church is important and why it should be a priority. Now, there are plenty more examples that we can lift up, but these are just 3 that I chose for this morning. And the first reason is because it changes lives. The church is not a building or a place. The church is a people. The people of God, the gathering of believers, the assembly of Jesus followers. And when you know Jesus, your life will be forever changed. That means that if you join us to worship, whether online or in person, you are the church. Wherever you are, however you worship, however you follow Jesus, we are the church together. So when Jesus says he's going to build his church, he's not talking about a building. He's talking about a family. And it is a family that we all are invited into. I'd like to think that Zacchaeus was in that crowd, waving his palm branches on that first Palm Sunday, shouting at the top of his lungs because he knew what that man had done for him, that his life had been forever changed. Who else was in the crowd that day? I wonder if maybe that man who had never walked a day in his life before he was lowered through the roof of that building where Jesus was preaching and he was healed. I wonder if that man was in that crowd. Jesus forgives and heals the paralyzed man. A little background, so for those who were paralyzed or those with disability during the time of Jesus, there was a stigma. They assumed that because of their sinfulness or because of somebody in their family's sinfulness, they were paralyzed for that reason. They were at the very bottom of society. They usually had no way of making income, and they had to rely on others' generosity to get by. And this man in this story, his life revolves around his mat. That is where he lives. That is how he spends his life. And it seems from this story, we know very little about this man, but what we do know is he has several friends. That seems to be the only thing going for him. And his friends care enough to bring him to this man, Jesus, that they've been hearing about. Now, they can't get to him. They can't get to Jesus, as the story goes. So probably an engineer in the group, thought, let's go up to the roof. And now roofs were also very different during the time of Jesus. It was mostly kind of muddy. And so they dug a hole through that roof. And those friends lowered that paralyzed man down. And we see Jesus forgives this man of his sins. And then in the story, these Pharisees, these religious leaders, they get mad at Jesus. And we see in the reading here, starting at verse 24, it says, "But I want you to know this is Jesus, that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. So he said to the paralyzed man, I tell you, get up, take your mat, and go home. Immediately he stood up in front of them, took what he had been lying on, and went home praising God. If we can just think about that. I like to get into the Bible stories. I like to picture myself there. How symbolic, how beautiful would it have been if that man was there and he laid that mat that he had lived on, that's all he had ever known until Jesus healed him, if he laid that mat down before Jesus as he rode into Jerusalem. How beautiful would that have been? The second reason why the church is important is because we carry each other's mats. We carry each other's burdens. And everyone that comes to church, that is the church, has a mat. Just like that man. Now that man's mat and our mats represent the things that we struggle with. It is the reminder of our brokenness. For you, maybe it's overwhelming fear. Maybe it's relationship issues. Maybe it's financial issues. Maybe it's addiction. We all have a mat, though. This mat revolves around our brokenness. And here's what I find to be true oftentimes in society. It is our brokenness that pushes people away, that keeps people at a distance. We're afraid to let people get too close. Because then we get in our heads or we think, oh, if they knew who I really am, or if they'd known what I'd really done, would they still love me? Now here's the beautiful thing about the gospel, about the story of Jesus, is that Jesus came to forgive and to seek and save the lost. That is what the church is called to be and do as well. In the church, we can be vulnerable. Just as that man who was lowered through the roof was vulnerable. Look, he had no exit plan. He had to rely on his friends who were above him, lowering him down. He didn't know what was going to happen next. A question I would like to lift up for you all today that you can think about this week is what or whose mat are you carrying? See, those friends of that paralyzed man were helping to carry his mat. Oftentimes in society, we will try to hide our messiness. We'll try to hide that brokenness. But sometimes when people see others struggle or they see their own dysfunction, they don't want to get involved. They say, oh, I don't have time for that. Oh, that's not my problem. I have my own messiness to handle. But here's the thing. Someone else's miracle might be on the other side of your willingness to pick up their mat. In fact, for a lot of us, we are here today because someone else did. Maybe for you that was that your grandparents took you to church. Or maybe it was a colleague or a friend or someone who said, hey, we want you to join us. We want you to be a part of this. Now, I know I've talked about this before on Sunday mornings, but just to lift up again, just the beauty and wonder that is the church, is that this church, Faith, helped to pick up my wife Morgan and I's mat when no one else would. There was a time not too long ago where Morgan and I had to quit both of our jobs. We had to not renew our lease, so we didn't know where we were going to be living. We didn't know what was going to happen next, and the seminary that I was attending was not helping me at all. All I knew was some voice on the other line of a telephone, that was Pastor Rusty, who was telling me, hey, we're gonna try and bring you here so that you can do your internship, so that you can become a pastor. That was one of the most difficult parts of Morgan and I's young life, being married together. We didn't know what was going to happen next. We didn't know where we were going to go, and it was a really, really rough spot. And Faith helped to pick up our mat. And here we are today. And look, y'all, the beautiful thing about that story as well is that Morgan and I weren't mission partners of this church. We had never tithed to this church before. We weren't lifelong Lutherans even. And that's the beauty of the church. We don't just pick up our own people's mats. Like we do take care of our own, but we also then go out into the world, into that messiness, and we help to pick up each other's mats. You don't have to be a lifelong believer. You don't even have to know the story of Jesus, but we are going to help to pick up your mat because that is what and who the church is. The church does not exist for us, but we are the church and we exist for the world. Something else that I've been thinking about with our Palm Sunday reading, I wonder exactly what and where the disciples were during the triumphal entry. What were they doing? We don't really hear about it in the reading too much. For me, I got to imagine that they were right there next to their teacher, their rabbi, their friend, their Messiah, that they must have been so excited, so ecstatic to hear those people chanting and yelling for Jesus as he came in to that city. Jesus called a ragtag group of people to be his disciples. They were far from perfect, and by no means were they qualified. The beauty of it is that Jesus chose ordinary people to be and build the church. And when we live into that calling to follow him, God will do extraordinary things through us. The 12 must have been so happy as they entered the city with Jesus. My final example for why the church is important is because we were created to be in community by a communal God. We weren't made to walk this life alone. And I think there's no greater example than Jesus calling the 12. Jesus, the perfect Son of God, he could have done all of it on his own, right? He didn't need to call those people. He didn't need to work with this ragtag group of folks who were dysfunctional and broken. And he had to, again, if you read the stories throughout Lent, he had to remind them again and again what his purpose was. We lifted up at the last Bible study, there's when Jesus predicts his death for the second time, and the disciples are arguing who's going to be at his left and his right when he comes into glory. He had to tell them again, knock it off. Look, none of you are going to be at my left or right. Instead, it's going to be two criminals. But yet, he chose to call those people. He chose to empower them, just as God empowers us today to be the church. The church is a family where grace, forgiveness, mercy, and love are overflowing. And we take that grace and that love and we share it with others, our neighbors, our coworkers, our friends. And when they experience that love, it is something that they can't categorize. It is something that they cannot understand. And as the church, we have something to offer, and we also have something to gain. Whether you've been on this journey of faith for 30 days or 30 years, we need the church to bring us closer to Jesus, to show us stuff in our own lives that we couldn't see on our own, and for people to reflect the love of God to us. And maybe you're thinking today, well, I'm just too busy to be a part of a church. Or maybe you're thinking you don't know enough about the Bible. Or I tried being a part of the church once, and it just didn't really work out. Well, let me just say to you, welcome. Welcome, because we are glad you're here. Because at one point in all of our lives, we have maybe felt that same way. We just didn't have time, or maybe we just didn't know enough. The church is a place where you can belong before you believe. Or maybe in your past church experience, you've been hurt. Maybe somebody took advantage of your trust. And if you've been hurt by the church as a pastor of the church, I am sorry that happened to you. The church is a place for all. The church is a family where no matter what you've done or what has been done to you, you can find healing and redemption. And doesn't this world need that more than ever? I'll be very honest with you, as I was preparing for this sermon, I couldn't believe in my short time in ministry, I did not think that I would be lifting up from the pulpit the brokenness and sadness of so many school shootings. And yet, once again, here we are. Another senseless, horrific school shooting this past week. In fact, I don't really listen to the news much anymore. I know that's probably a bad thing. I probably should to stay informed, but I don't. Morgan called me on the cell phone and told me about it. And I couldn't believe it. And here's the nice thing. So what we did then is we had a conversation about it. We talked about, well, what do we do? And that's the wonderful thing about the church. We might not have all the answers, but when we see injustice, when we see brokenness in this world, we are going to talk about it in a polite and friendly way. And then we're going to pray about it. And then we're going to go out into the world to be the church, to bring about God's kingdom right here on earth. Because we might not have all the right answers, but we certainly know what right looks like. because Jesus has shown us that time and time again. We will work tirelessly towards bringing about the kingdom right here on earth. And Jesus tells us, Jesus said, that I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. There is power in partnership. And as the church, we will make a difference in the world just like Jesus showed us. On that first Palm Sunday, the people were so excited to see Jesus. They rallied around him in support. Now we know by the end of that week, most of them have vanished or are now in a mob booing him. Jesus died for his church, and he died for you and me. And as believers, we know that following Jesus and being a part of the church will forever change our lives. We know that the church is a place where we can carry each other's burdens, and we know that we are created to be in community by a communal God. So as we wave our palm branches today and shout and sing, let us be as excited when we leave this space of worship to share and invite people into this beautiful transformation. Because being the church is not just about Sunday mornings, but it's what happens between Sundays. And we are the church in the world. We know that our lives and others will be changed and renewed, all for his glory. Will you pray with me? Almighty God, we give you all the thanks and all the praise. And on this triumphal entry, as we celebrate Jesus' entry to Jerusalem, I would hope that you would help us to put a passion in our hearts that we might be your church, that brick by brick we might bring about your kingdom. In a day and age where people might not see the priority of the church, we as your followers are called to give them a reason, to show them the why, to invite them in, to welcome them, to be the church, to be the family that God has always intended for us. As we make our way through Holy Week, I'd ask that you would guide us and lead us and help point us to the direction of the cross and ultimately to the empty tomb. It's in your Son's name that we pray. Amen.